They say grief brings families together, but it really just strips away the polite masks hiding pure greed. When my brother-in-law announced he was surrendering my mother's entire $4.2 million estate to my wife right after the funeral, I knew it wasn't a gift. He was pressing a loaded gun into our hands. He just didn't realize my mother had quietly removed the bullets before passing, aiming the barrel straight back at his forehead. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our channel monetization features, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, but we are deeply committed to bringing you these experiences. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better and longer, describing highly detailed situations we cannot make public on YouTube, and featuring multiple emotional voice actors in the same story. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon channel link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us begin today's story with me, Claire Hamilton, facing the ultimate family betrayal. The air inside Arthur Pendleton's law office in downtown Seattle was so thick and stifling that it felt incredibly hard to pull into my lungs. It had been exactly 48 hours since we lowered my mother, Patricia Hamilton, into the cold earth. She was a real estate titan, a woman who built a massive empire from the ground up with nothing but sheer grit and a mind sharper than cut glass. Now, her entire lifelong legacy was reduced to a stack of pristine manila folders sitting quietly on a massive oak desk. I sat rigidly in a high-backed leather chair, feeling utterly trapped, at 35 years old. I spent my days designing open, breathable concepts as an architect at Lumina Space Designs. Yet in this confined room, the walls felt like they were slowly crushing me. My wife, Elena, sat close beside me. Her warm hand anchored mine, offering a silent, steady stream of comfort amidst the suffocating grief. Directly across from us sat my older sister, Chloe, and her husband, Marcus. Chloe kept her eyes glued firmly to her lap, nervously twisting her wedding ring until her knuckle turned bright red. Marcus, however, sat unnaturally tall, his expensive tailored suit looking more like battle armor than respectful mourning attire. Mr. Pendleton softly cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reached for the thickest envelope on his desk. He had barely broken the red wax seal when the heavy silence of the room was violently ripped apart. Arthur, before you read the standard divisions, there is something we need to establish right now, Marcus declared. His voice was loud, booming with an unnatural confidence that echoed off the dark mahogany-paneled walls. The seasoned lawyer paused, looking mildly irritated by the sudden interruption. I furrowed my brow, exchanging a highly confused glance with Elena. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on his knees, and put on a sickeningly solemn expression. Chloe and I had a very long, very emotional talk last night. We know what Patricia's actual wishes were. Regardless of what the outdated documents in that folder might say, we have decided to step back completely. We are formally relinquishing our share of the estate. We believe Elena is the only person truly deserving to inherit the entire $4.2 million. For a long moment, the only sound in the grand office was the relentless ticking of the vintage grandfather clock in the corner. The room went completely motionless. Stunned did not even begin to cover what I was feeling. My brain scrambled to make sense of the words. $4.2 million, handed over freely. Marcus was a notorious corporate raider, a ruthless opportunist infamous for squeezing every last cent out of vulnerable business partners. This was a man who would gladly foreclose on a family home just to meet his quarterly profit margins. The very idea of his unprompted generosity was not just completely out of character, it was biologically impossible for him. "I beg your pardon, Marcus," Mr. Pendleton asked, his strict professional composure cracking just a fraction. "It is quite simple," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with forced humility. Patricia was a formidable businesswoman. She always admired Elena's solid background in financial auditing. She often mentioned that Elena was the only one capable of properly managing such a substantial asset pool. I know Patricia wanted the legacy protected, and keeping it under Elena's direct control is the right thing to do. It is her final, unspoken wish, and as a loving family, we must honor it. He placed a hand squarely over his heart. It was a spectacular performance, worthy of a stage award, but the ugly cracks were already starting to show. My eyes narrowed sharply as I studied his face. Despite the aggressively air-conditioned room, a thick layer of sweat had formed across Marcus's forehead, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His left foot tapped a frantic, erratic rhythm against the expensive Persian carpet. Before anyone could even process his absurd declaration, he rapidly unlatched his sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a heavily stamped legal document, and slid it aggressively across the polished wood desk. He did not push it toward me, the biological daughter. He pushed it directly toward my wife. I had my legal team draft the beneficiary acceptance transfer last night to expedite the process, Marcus urged, his tone suddenly shifting from mournful to intensely eager. He produced a heavy silver pen and practically shoved it into Elena's hand. Just sign right here on the dotted line. Elena, let us get this painful paperwork out of the way right now so we can all finally go home and grieve in peace. I reached across the expanse of the polished wood and firmly clamped my hand over Elena's wrist, just as her fingers brushed the cold silver of the pen. With a swift, deliberate motion, I swept the heavy instrument away. It clattered loudly against the mahogany surface, rolling until it hit the edge of the leather desk pad. Nobody is signing anything today. Marcus, I stated, keeping my voice dangerously level. I locked my eyes onto his sweating face. My mother spent 40 years building her empire with meticulous attention to detail. I will not disrespect her legacy by bypassing the legal due diligence she would have strictly demanded. We are going to take this document, hand it to our own independent counsel, and review every single clause. For a fraction of a second, the charismatic facade shattered. A raw, visceral flash of pure rage twisted Marcus's features. The muscles in his jaw locked so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding together in the quiet room. He aggressively yanked his cuffs down, taking a sharp breath through his nose before violently pasting that sickeningly fake, understanding smile back onto his face. Claire, you are simply letting your grief cloud your judgment. He sighed condescendingly, leaning back in his chair. I am trying to save this family months of agonizing probate court and hefty legal fees. By stalling, you are just wasting everyone's precious time. But fine, take the paperwork. Just know that this generous offer will not stay on the table forever. We left the office shortly after, clutching the thick file. The ride home was consumed by a suffocating, heavy silence. The moment we stepped inside our house, Elena did not even bother taking off her coat. She walked straight to the dining table, flipped open her laptop, and tied her hair into a tight knot. As a senior forensic auditor, Elena possessed a mind that saw through numbers the way an X-ray saw through flesh. She knew Marcus was hiding a venomous snake in the grass, and she was determined to find the fangs. By 2 a.m, our dining room had transformed into a makeshift war room. The harsh blue glow of the screen illuminated Elena's focused face as her fingers flew relentlessly across the keyboard. She bypassed the glossy surface-level summaries Marcus had provided and went straight for the public depository records, hunting down the specific tax identification numbers tied to the $4.2 million portfolio he was so eager to surrender. This makes absolutely no sense, Elena muttered, her eyes darting back and forth across a spreadsheet she had just decrypted from a state registry database. Claire, bring me that second folder from Pendleton's office, the one with the corporate restructuring history. I slid the papers over to her, my stomach twisting into cold, hard knots. What did you find? I found a ghost, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of awe and absolute horror. That $4.2 million is not sitting safely in a blue-chip trust fund. It is aggressively anchored to a holding entity called Apex Zenith Properties. It is a shell company, and it is actively imploding. She turned the laptop towards me. I stared at the dense blocks of legal jargon, my architectural background struggling to decipher the financial labyrinth until Elena began translating the nightmare into plain English. Apex Zenith Properties was facing a catastrophic structural collapse. They owned a massive tract of industrial land on the outskirts of the city, land that had been secretly used for illegal toxic waste dumping for nearly a decade. The Environmental Protection Agency had just concluded a 2-year undercover investigation. The findings were devastating. The shell company was not just facing bankruptcy, they were weeks away from being slapped with a crippling, non-negotiable federal penalty of exactly $10 million for severe environmental law violations. I felt all the blood rush out of my head, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. "Marcus runs Apex Zenith?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elena shook her head slowly, pulling up a deeply buried signature registry. "No, he was smarter than that. He operated entirely from the shadows." She pointed to the faded digital signatures on the screen. The financial breadcrumbs painted a sickening picture. Years ago, while my mother was distracted by her first bout of illness, Marcus had covertly used his administrative access to forge and manipulate documents. He had set up the holding company using my mother's credentials, effectively making her estate the ultimate guarantor of the toxic properties. He had been conducting these highly illegal transactions under her name, reaping the hidden profits while funneling all the massive liabilities directly into this specific portfolio. The sudden realization hit me with the blunt force of a freight train. The brilliant, twisted knot of his plan finally unraveled in my mind. Marcus was not offering us a gift. He was offering us a death sentence. The moment Elena legally accepted the $4.2 million transfer, she would inherit the entire corporate structure tied to it. We would instantly become the sole owners of Apex Zenith Properties. When the federal government dropped the hammer next month, that $10 million fine would fall squarely onto our shoulders. It would instantly vaporize the inheritance, drain our personal savings, seize our home, and drag us into a bottomless pit of catastrophic bankruptcy and potential criminal prosecution. Meanwhile, Marcus and my oblivious sister Chloe would walk away entirely clean, keeping the vast majority of my mother's untainted, legitimate assets without a single drop of toxic debt attached to their names. He was trying to use my wife as a human shield to absorb a $10 million bullet meant for him. The morning after our horrifying discovery, I drove alone to my mother's sprawling Victorian house in the historic district. The heavy oak front door groaned as I pushed it open, stepping into a cavernous hallway that felt entirely too quiet. The faint, lingering scent of her signature lavender perfume and the sharp antiseptic smell from her hospice nurses still clung to the velvet drapes. Walking through those empty rooms, a suffocating wave of grief washed over me. I was here to pack away her personal keepsakes, but every corner of the house screamed with memories of her fading presence. I wandered into the solarium, where she had spent her final months. I vividly remembered sitting by her side during her grueling chemotherapy sessions. Her body had become incredibly frail, her bones visible beneath papery skin, but her mind had remained as sharp and unforgiving as a steel trap. I recalled how, between bouts of nausea, she would interrogate me with highly specific, bizarre questions. She did not ask about my architectural designs or my day at the office. Instead, she grilled me on corporate liability, asking how structural foundations in business could be completely isolated from their parent companies, and what legal mechanisms could force an aggressive takeover to backfire. At the time, I thought it was just her business-obsessed brain trying to distract itself from the poison dripping into her veins. Now, standing in the cold sunlight of the empty room, a chill ran down my spine. She was not making idle conversation. She was building a fortress. I made my way up the winding staircase to her master bedroom to begin sorting through her vanity. My hands brushed against a beautifully carved mahogany box where she kept her collection of antique pocket watches. It was her most prized possession, a gift from my late father. As I lifted a heavy gold timepiece from its resting place, my fingers grazed the deep crimson velvet lining. There was a strange, hard lump concealed beneath the fabric. Frowning, I pressed down on it, It did not feel like a loose gear or a stray piece of jewelry. I carefully retrieved a small silver letter opener from her desk and gently sliced the velvet seam. Tucked away inside the hidden cavity was a heavy cold brass key stamped with a series of numbers and the logo of a highly secure private bank located right in the financial district. Within 2 hours, Elena and I were standing in the sterile, heavily fortified basement vault of the bank. The branch manager solemnly guided us to a large metal deposit box, unlocking his side before stepping away to give us privacy. My hands shook slightly as I turned the brass key and pulled the long metal drawer free. It was not filled with stock certificates or emergency cash. Inside lay only 2 items, a sleek silver thumb drive and a worn, leather-bound journal. We took the items to a private viewing room, the heavy steel door sealing us in absolute silence. I opened the journal, instantly recognizing the elegant, sweeping loops of my mother's handwriting. The ink on the first few pages was steady, but as I turned further, the strokes became jagged, betraying the physical pain she was enduring toward the end. The contents took my breath away. It was not a diary of her feelings or her battle with illness. It was a meticulous, detailed ledger of Marcus's betrayal. She had known everything, months before her diagnosis. Her sharp instincts had caught the subtle discrepancies in the quarterly margins. She wrote about tracking the embezzled funds, discovering the toxic wasteland he had acquired, and unearthing the impending federal investigation. But the most chilling entry detailed his intense, boiling hatred for my wife. My mother noted that Marcus had never forgiven Elena for an incident 5 years ago, when Elena's casual observation during a family dinner had accidentally exposed a massive accounting error in one of his minor subsidiaries, costing him a lucrative promotion. He despised her brilliance and feared her auditing skills. According to the journal, my mother realized that Marcus intended to use his forged administrative powers to dump the entire toxic holding company onto Elena the moment she died, weaponizing the inheritance to destroy the woman who had once humiliated him. Elena squeezed my hand, her eyes wide as she read the words over my shoulder. My mother had watched the predator circle her family, and instead of screaming for help, she had quietly locked the doors. I turned to the final entry, dated just 1 week before she passed away. The handwriting was weak, but the ink was pressed deeply into the paper, a testament to her unbreakable resolve. It read as a direct command to me. Claire, my brave girl, if you are reading this, the vulture has already made his move. Do not expose him immediately. Do not show your hand. Play the fool and let him believe he has won. Let him buy the rope to hang himself. I have already prepared a devastating sentence for his arrogance, but he must be the one to step onto the gallows. I closed the leather journal, the heavy thud echoing in the small room. The grief that had been crushing my chest all morning suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning clarity. We were no longer victims scrambling in the dark. We were the executioners. The clinking of silverware against fine china sounded unnaturally loud in our dining room. We had invited my sister and her husband over for dinner under the guise of a peace offering, pretending that 48 hours of reflection had completely changed our perspective. The roasted duck Elena prepared sat half-eaten between us, serving as the centerpiece for the most dangerous theater production I had ever participated in. Marcus sat at the head of our table, a position he had presumptuously claimed the moment he walked through our front door. He swirled his expensive red wine, his chest puffed out with the unearned pride of a conquering king. He truly believed we had swallowed the bait whole. I must say, Claire, I am incredibly relieved you two finally saw reason, Marcus declared, taking a slow, arrogant sip. Legal battles over estates are so terribly draining, and let us be completely honest, your little drafting job at Lumina Space Designs hardly equips you for the brutal realities of high-level wealth management. Dealing with a $4.2 million asset pool is a completely different universe than picking out ergonomic chairs for a boutique office. I gripped my linen napkin under the table, my fingernails digging painfully into my own palms. I forced my facial muscles to relax, summoning every ounce of willpower my mother had passed down to me. You are absolutely right, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice soft and deliberately submissive. I was just overwhelmed by grief at the lawyer's office. When Elena and I sat down and truly looked at the situation, we realized what a massive burden you were taking off our shoulders. We are deeply grateful. Marcus grinned, exposing his perfectly bleached teeth. Family looks out for family, Claire. That is what I have always said. Beside him, my sister Chloe kept her eyes fixed on her plate. She pushed a piece of asparagus around with her fork, her face pale and drawn. She had barely spoken 2 words since arriving at 7 o'clock. Elena leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. She projected the perfect image of a meticulous, slightly paranoid accountant. Since we are on the subject of family protection, Marcus, I need to discuss the transfer logistics. I have been running the preliminary tax projections for the acquisition. Marcus stiffened slightly, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before the smug confidence rushed back. There is nothing to worry about. Elena, my legal team made sure the transfer is completely airtight. I am sure they did, Elena countered smoothly, offering a warm, appreciative smile. However, my auditing firm has extremely strict compliance protocols. If I am going to absorb a $4.2 million portfolio into my personal financial ecosystem, the Internal Revenue Service will immediately flag it for a comprehensive audit. They will look for any sign of tax evasion on your end. I refuse to let your incredible generosity result in a federal tax penalty for you and Chloe. Marcus leaned closer, hooked by the subtle stroke to his ego. What exactly do you need? I need the absolute raw data, Elena stated with professional authority. I need the original wet ink contracts you signed on Patricia's behalf over the last 5 years, specifically the ones establishing the asset boundaries. More importantly, I need the complete digital metadata files for the holding company transfers. The government auditors will want to verify the exact timestamps, the IP addresses, and the digital signature logs to prove that you and Chloe have 0 remaining ties to these assets. If I have the complete metadata and the original drafts, I can build a firewall that keeps the tax investigators entirely away from you. The trap was set. The bait was dangling right in front of his face. I held my breath, terrified he would hear the loud, frantic pounding of my heart. If Marcus possessed even a shred of genuine caution, he would have realized that handing over the metadata and original signatures was equivalent to handing over a detailed map of his own fraud. But his monumental arrogance completely blinded him. He did not hear a trap. He only heard a desperate accountant begging to lock herself into his $10 million toxic debt. He saw an opportunity to make the transfer absolutely irreversible. You know, Elena, you are exactly as thorough as Patricia always claimed, Marcus chuckled, a deep, triumphant sound that made my stomach churn. It just so happens I brought my primary portfolio briefcase with me tonight. I wanted to be prepared in case you had questions. I have the master encrypted hard drive right in my car, along with the physical archive folders containing every single original signature you are asking for. That would be perfect, Elena said, her voice remaining steady as a rock. If you hand those over tonight, I can process the compliance logs by tomorrow morning, and we can sign the final acceptance papers with Mr. Pendleton on Monday. Marcus practically leaped out of his chair. He was so desperate to seal our doom that he did not even finish his glass of wine. He excused himself and hurried out the front door to his luxury sedan. The moment the door clicked shut, a heavy silence fell over the dining room. I glanced at Chloe. She had finally stopped moving her food. Her eyes darted toward the front door, then back to me. A deep, troubled frown etched across her face. "Why does he have the original files with him?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with sudden realization. "He told me the lawyers locked everything in the firm's central vault 2 weeks ago. He said he was not allowed to touch them until probate cleared." I looked at my sister, seeing the first terrifying sparks of realization igniting in her eyes. The contradictory statements, the unusual eagerness to give away millions, the frantic rush to push the paperwork onto Elena. The seeds of doubt my mother had planted were finally taking root in Chloe's mind. Before I could carefully craft a response, The front door swung open. Marcus marched back into the dining room, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He slammed a thick leather binder and a sleek black hard drive down onto the table right next to Elena's plate. "Everything you need is right there," Marcus announced, panting slightly from his hurried trip. "Every digital footprint, every original contract, every administrative log I ever signed for Patricia, it is all yours now." Elena placed her hand over the black hard drive. I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten, locking away the lethal truth of what she had just acquired. "Thank you, Marcus," Elena said softly, looking directly into his eyes. "You have no idea how much this means to us. This changes absolutely everything." "Do not mention it," Marcus replied, raising his freshly filled glass to toast his own fabricated victory. "To family." I raised my water glass, clinking it gently against his. I looked at the man who had just gleefully handed over the exact instruments of his own destruction, completely unaware that the executioner's blade was already swinging down toward his neck. "To family," I echoed, taking a slow sip. Monday morning arrived with a suffocating, bruised gray sky pouring heavy sheets of rain over downtown Seattle. Walking back into Arthur Pendleton's grand law office felt exactly like stepping inside a high-pressure combustion chamber. The air was practically humming with a violent, high-frequency tension. It felt like a thick wire being pulled and stretched to its absolute breaking point, ready to snap and blind whoever stood too close. Elena and I took our seats on one side of the massive oak desk. Across from us, Chloe looked physically ill, shrinking deeply into the corner of the leather sofa with her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. Marcus, however, was buzzing with a manic, predatory energy that consumed the entire room. He had not come alone this time. Pacing aggressively behind him was a sharply dressed, bullish man introduced as his private corporate counsel. For 20 straight minutes, this new lawyer relentlessly badgered Mr. Pendleton. He slapped his palms loudly against the mahogany desk, demanding they bypass the traditional, mandated reading of the testaments. "My client is doing you all a monumental favor today," the bullish lawyer barked, his voice grating and incredibly loud in the refined space. "We are well past the need for sentimental pageantry. Arthur, we have the binding transfer contracts right here in our hands. Let us process the signatures immediately, skip the formal readings, and save everyone hours of unnecessary billable time. This is a simple administrative handover." "Mr." Pendleton sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly over his legal pad, refusing to be bullied in his own domain. Sensing the mounting resistance, Marcus held up a hand, silencing his attack dog. He stepped into the absolute center of the room, deliberately adjusting his expensive silk tie to command the space. He looked down at us, wearing a grotesque, heavily practiced mask of familial pity. "We have been through more than enough agonizing pain this week," Marcus announced, his voice dripping with fabricated empathy and false grace. "I just want to see this family heal and move forward. By stepping away from this massive financial responsibility, Chloe and I are ensuring that Patricia's legacy is managed efficiently, without the poison of greed or internal conflict. Sometimes, true leadership requires knowing exactly when to surrender control for the greater good of the bloodline. I am just glad I could be the one to guide us to this peaceful, honorable resolution." He styled himself as the ultimate savior of our family. With a dramatic, sweeping gesture, he slid the heavy beneficiary acceptance papers across the desk, positioning them precisely in front of Elena. His private lawyer aggressively leaned over and tapped the signature line twice with a heavy gold fountain pen. Elena slowly reached out and picked up the pen. The vintage grandfather clock in the corner seemed to tick louder, every single second stretching into an unbearable eternity. Elena shifted her weight forward, the sharp gold nib of the pen hovering barely a fraction of an inch above the crisp white paper. I watched Marcus closely. He was practically vibrating out of his custom suit. His eyes were wide, glowing with a raw, sadistic triumph that he could no longer keep hidden behind his mask of grief. A thick bead of sweat formed at his hairline and rolled slowly down his temple, betraying his intense, desperate excitement. He was literally seconds away from locking us into $10 million of federal toxic debt. He was holding his breath, waiting for the blue ink to bleed into the page, waiting for the steel trap to spring shut and crush us entirely. At that exact razor-thin moment, I reached out and rested my hand firmly on my wife's shoulder. Elena paused. She did not sign. Instead, she looked up, locked her eyes directly onto Marcus, and let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across her face. With a soft, deliberate click, she placed the gold pen back down on the desk and pushed the entire stack of contracts away. Without breaking eye contact with my brother-in-law, I reached into my coat pocket. My hand did not shake. I pulled out the sleek silver thumb drive we had retrieved from the hidden bank vault and slid it smoothly across the polished wood, straight toward Arthur Pendleton. The old lawyer looked at the drive, then looked up at me. He slowly reached up and removed his wire-rimmed glasses, folding them with precise deliberation. The mild professional irritation that had clouded his face all morning completely vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp, ice-cold smile. He picked up the heavy file Marcus had been aggressively pushing. "I am afraid there has been a rather monumental misunderstanding today, Marcus," Mr. Pendleton announced, his voice slicing through the heavy air like a freshly sharpened scythe. "Every single document you brought into my office, including the estate structure you are so desperately trying to surrender, is entirely worthless." Mr. Pendleton tossed Marcus's file carelessly onto the floor. "Patricia had me legally void that specific iteration of her portfolio exactly 12 months ago. In fact, gentlemen, I have not even broken the seal on Patricia Hamilton's actual will yet." The heavy silence in the room was absolute. Marcus stared at Arthur Pendleton, his mouth slightly open, the arrogant sneer completely wiped from his face. His aggressive private lawyer stepped back, suddenly looking very unsure of his footing. "Mr." Pendleton reached for the heavy silver letter opener on his desk and neatly sliced through the red wax seal of the final, untouched folder. Exactly 3 months before her passing, Patricia executed a massive covert asset severance. Mr. Pendleton explained, his voice echoing with undeniable authority. "With my assistance, she legally and permanently detached the $4.2 million in liquid capital from Apex Zenith Properties. That money was moved into an isolated, impenetrable blind trust. It is completely clean, totally secure, and safe from any impending federal sanctions." "That is impossible," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. "The liability was anchored to the estate. I structured it myself." "You did?" Mr. Pendleton agreed, a cold satisfaction in his eyes. "But Patricia was always 10 steps ahead of you, Marcus. She knew you had secretly saddled her name with a toxic wasteland. She also knew that simply reporting you would drag the entire family through years of agonizing litigation. She needed you to voluntarily confess. She needed you to claim ownership of the fraud. So, she embedded a highly classified fraud clause into the deepest bylaws of the holding company." I felt Elena squeeze my hand tightly. The executioner's blade was finally dropping. "The clause was a legal tripwire," the old lawyer continued, leaning forward. "It stipulated that if the original architect of the shell company ever provided physical and digital proof of their covert operations, the liability would instantly revert back to them. Last Thursday night, in your desperate, greedy attempt to trick Elena into absorbing your mess, you willingly handed over your original wet ink contracts. You voluntarily surrendered your digital metadata. By doing so, you provided the exact chain of evidence required to activate Patricia's trap." Marcus let out a ragged gasp, stumbling backward until his legs hit the edge of the leather sofa. "Congratulations, Marcus," Mr. Pendleton said softly. "The tripwire is officially tripped. You have successfully severed the estate from the shell company. 100% of the $10 million environmental penalty, along with all associated federal criminal liability, is now permanently and irrevocably bound to your personal name." Before Marcus could even formulate a single word of defense, Mr. Pendleton reached under his desk and pressed a small button. The heavy mahogany doors of the conference room swung open. A tall, stern-looking man in a dark suit walked in, flashing a silver badge. He was a federal investigator from the Environmental Protection Agency. Someone Mr. Pendleton had contacted weeks in advance on my mother's strict orders. The agent walked straight to the desk, and Mr. Pendleton calmly handed over the silver thumb drive containing every ounce of data Marcus had so proudly surrendered at our dining table. "Marcus," the agent said, his tone devoid of any emotion, "we have a significant amount of paperwork to discuss regarding your illegal dumping sites. I suggest you call a very good defense attorney." Marcus's bullish private lawyer took one look at the federal agent, quickly packed his briefcase, and walked out of the room without saying a single word to his client. Rats always abandon a sinking ship. I turned to look at my sister. Chloe was trembling violently, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute horror and profound heartbreak. She looked at the man she had slept next to for 8 years, finally seeing the monster hiding beneath the tailored suits. He had looked her in the eye and lied. He had meticulously plotted to financially destroy and potentially imprison her own sister just to save his own skin. Marcus reached a shaking hand toward her. "Chloe, please, you have to help me. I did it for us." Chloe stared at him, her tears finally spilling over, with a sickeningly calm, deliberate motion. She grabbed her left hand, violently pulled off her diamond wedding ring, and threw it. The heavy gold band hit the polished oak desk with a sharp, final clatter. She did not say a single word to him. She turned her back on her ruined husband, walked across the room, and stood firmly right next to me and Elena. Marcus collapsed onto the floor. His knees simply gave out. He sat there, a broken, pathetic shell of a man, desperately gasping for air as the realization crushed him. His immense arrogance had blinded him to the trap, and he had gleefully hammered every single nail into his own coffin. He had just signed away his freedom, his fortune, and his marriage, all in one fell swoop. An hour later, Elena and I walked out of the law building and stepped onto the damp Seattle pavement. A gentle, cool rain was falling, washing the heavy tension from the air. I looked up at the gray sky, taking a deep, cleansing breath for the first time in what felt like weeks. I finally understood what my mother had done. Her greatest legacy was not the $4.2 million. Her true inheritance was the flawless, ruthlessly sharp protection she had built around us, shielding us from the beasts disguised as family members. She taught me that you do not always have to fight a monster head-on. Sometimes, the most perfect, devastating revenge is simply handing the villain a shovel, stepping back, and letting them dig their own grave. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story captivating and want to support our work, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our very best, highly detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by using the link provided in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again for your time, and I will see you in the next story.